So my experience of working around FGM has been both positive and negative. I think some of the positive stuff is kind of seeing a lot of change around policy, a lot of people actually talking about the issue, there's a lot more awareness, there's a lot more public awareness. And then there's also been kind of the negative stuff, you know, when we were kind of first starting out, kind of being accused of being accused of not really being Muslim or not being Somali. It's kind of that idea where if I speak out against FGM, then I'm inherently going against my culture. And I think that was really difficult for me because I pride myself in being Somali. My cultural heritage is so important to who I am. But FGM was just something that I couldn't stand for, and I thought it was violence against women and girls. And there was just so many people that I knew that had gone through the issue that for me, it was about standing up for them and actually saying I'm fortunate enough to be able to talk about an issue that I find so inhumane and really takes a lot from women. So I think there's been both positive and negative experiences, but sometimes it's a lot easier to dwell on the negative and a lot easier to be affected by all the negative people around you. And we don't think enough about the positive, like, you know, the policies that are out there now, the fact that there's kind of this movement of second generation diaspora who are really for change, not just here, but also back home. And it's just become more publicized and I don't think people kind of see it as a Somali issue or an African issue anymore. It's more of a global one. And I think that's really important because it's for us acknowledging that gender-based violence happens everywhere. And FGM is just another form of that. And the more that we can tackle these issues and the more that we empower those women from those communities to tackle those issues, that's the only way we're going to eradicate it. This was kind of related to myself and a friend of mine called Ifra, where she had done a talk about FGM at a community centre. And what happened was one of the women had disclosed that she'd gone through FGM when she was young, and then she got married and her husband had demanded her to go through a more severe form of the practice. And so went through it again, and she kind of came to the UK because he was working, and then he went back home, I think. It was something around that. But she was really scared to go back to her native country because she knew that if she took her daughter back, she would be cut. And her biggest fear was, you know, I've been through this, I know what it does to the body, I know what it does to the mind, and I don't want my daughter to go through this. And the session we were doing was just kind of basically raising awareness and some safeguarding stuff. And as soon as we heard that, for us it was just, how can we help her? You know, who do we get in contact with? And straight away was kind of getting in contact with our head of safeguarding, our charity, and also referring it to the police and our designated safeguarding nurse. And we were kind of fortunate enough to have enough links that we could provide her with the help that she needed and kind of refer her to a lawyer who really helped her. And I think the last time we heard, they were reviewing her status here as a migrant. And she'd already started working with the police and was doing work with the police around FGM, and she was kind of raising awareness in her own way. And so for us, it was just it was really special to know that a woman who was really stuck and kind of in a really difficult place had come out at the other end and was now doing FGM work and raising awareness in her own way, and knowing that we actually were able to protect a young child from the practice. I think a lot of the reasons why people do it will be a lot to do with virginity, being pure. Economic status is one thing, you know, where the daughter's dowry price will be a lot higher if she has gone through FGM. And I think sometimes their reasoning is to genuinely make sure that their daughter isn't stigmatized in that community and isn't branded a whore, isn't labeled something really negative because she hasn't gone through FGM. And I think in their own weird way, they're trying to protect their daughters, not realizing that actually this practice derives from something a lot darker, and it's based all around patriarchy and misogyny, and it's about controlling the woman's body. And I think when we start having those discussions and we start peeling away all those layers and say, well, actually, virginity perhaps isn't about the body, but about the mind. You know, how can you say someone is pure and someone isn't? Surely God created us all perfectly. And it's kind of having these discussions and saying, you know, why does the girl have to prove that she's a virgin and the guy hasn't? You know, we don't mutilate them, but we mutilate the girls. Why is that? And having discussions around misogyny and patriarchy and gender inequality. I think a lot of it is done because of gender inequality, but people would like to use, you know, cultural reasons or religious motivations just to justify what they're doing is right. I think because we work with young people, and a lot of them don't come out and say, I've gone through FGM. We won't have much experience when it comes to that. But I think with the older generation, I think a lot of them are just now coming to terms with the fact that what happened to them was wrong. And I think one of my biggest things is everyone sees FGM as such a violent physical act, which it is, but I don't think they realize the mental health implications of it. And it's actually a really hard issue to discuss as a woman. A lot of people will just kind of like brush away the mental health implications and say, you know, you went through something very physical, something really violent. And it's to say, okay, we know that she has, and you've stated what happened to her was wrong. Now you need to support her with everything else, you know, the trauma, the PTSD, the nightmares. And I think that's just an area which hasn't really been touched upon other than Dahlia Project. And I think sometimes when you're a black woman, you're supposed to be strong. You're kind of instilled with this idea that as a black woman, you need to be strong because there are way too many adversities for you to cry. And sometimes it's okay to be like, it's fine to cry, you know, you're a human being, it's okay. But I think that's something that's kind of coming around now and kind of discussing, well, we're discussing it now, I think, more openly. I think the biggest problem is that FGM means we have to talk about vaginas. And no one likes to talk about vaginas, unfortunately. I think everyone's just really scared of the issue. They like to pretend that 52% of the population doesn't have one. They like to pretend that they didn't actually come from one. And because of that, it's just kind of labeled as a really sensitive topic, a really difficult issue to discuss. But in reality, I think when it comes to our bodies, we just don't know enough to start talking about it. And I think one of the biggest issues in tackling FGM is that young girls are told that this is how a normal vagina looks. Or actually, they're not even told how a vagina looks. So they assume that, you know, what a vagina looks like is what they'll see on the internet. Not realizing that actually, you know, just like every fingerprint isn't the same, every vagina isn't going to be the same. And it's to give them enough confidence within their own bodies to say, actually, I'm comfortable with who I am. And I think that comes with doing really good PSHE sessions for young people, providing services where young people can discuss this. And I think a lot of, you know, especially in the UK, when you say PSHE or SRE, and, you know, this has to be statutory, you know, sex relationship education has to be statutory. Politicians just like to run away from that. And I think for us, that's what we're currently campaigning for. It's to say, actually, as young people, we're demanding this, and this is something that we know doesn't exist in our system, so you need to provide it. And I know it's going to take quite some time. And I remember actually the first time we brought it up, someone told us, they were like, you know what, I don't ever think PSHE is going to be statutory. And in the last recent 2 years, everyone's like, actually, it might be a possibility, because everyone is all of a sudden realizing we have a huge issue in this country when it comes to how we see the female body. I think a lot of the work that we do is about empowering the next generation. It's about telling the next generation about their rights. It's about saying, you know, as the older we get, you know, there's going to be a point where we're going to want to have children, and, you know, we can possibly end up with a daughter. And it's to say, actually, I don't want my daughter to go through this. I don't want any child to go through this. It's about empowering us enough to say no, not just to FGM actually, but kind of forced marriage, this idea of rape culture, consent, healthy relationships. It's about discussing all these issues now so that by the time we are 30, 40, and if we do have children, I can have those conversations with my children, and, you know, it can kind of be passed on through that way. And I think a lot of things you learn from home. And so to be able to go home and say, actually, in my house, my home is my safe space, that is really important, because apparently schools are not now, so the home needs to be. But I think we can end FGM by discussing gender equality. I think it's about empowering women and giving them that space to discuss the issues such as FGM and forced marriage. I think it's about especially empowering women of color. I feel like sometimes there's so many spaces where, you know, issues are discussed about them, but they're not in that space to discuss what their actual experiences are. And I think sometimes people have this idea that, you know, you're Black, you're Muslim, I completely get what your experiences are. And sometimes it's like you need to step back a little bit and say, actually, there's racism out there, there's Islamophobia out there, there's gender inequality out there, there's so many inequalities that I have to deal with. I think just give me that space to discuss it and don't discuss it for me. And especially as a young person, that's really hard to find that space because everything is kind of, you're not an adult yet, or it's really controlled. But when you do get that platform, it's kind of sharing that platform with everyone else around you and saying, actually, I get that we need to discuss this as a gender issue and we are all here as women, but our experiences as women are all going to be different depending on where you're from. And I think also with FGM, it's being really comfortable in our own bodies and kind of, I think, stop looking at magazines and think, you know what, this is what I need to aspire for. Every woman is going to be different and it's okay to be different. I think we like to kind of homogenize everyone instead of embracing our differences. And I think that's one of the most important things. It's just, it's fine to be different.